Welcome to the Beyond Body podcast with your hosts, Mia and Holly. Join us for a sometimes fortnightly podcast
where we explore all things mental health, being a messy human, and how to get the most out of this one precious life.
and all the ridiculous stories in between. Hi everyone, just Mia jumping in to let you know that there is a slight volume and audio quality difference between Holly's audio and my audio. Zoom decided it didn't like the microphone it has loved for the last 12 months, so apologies for that slight difference. We'll have everything back to normal for the next episode. We will see you in a couple of weeks. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I have absolutely no exciting stuff to share, so it's all on you, Hol. Well, actually, no, we do have exciting stuff to share, but you always have exciting stuff to share because you are in...
Well, now I'm in Tenerife, so I'm in Spain. Do I have exciting stuff to share? Something I've noticed over this last week, since I think I've now been on the road traveling for like 6 or maybe even like 7 weeks, but I've just have noticed how much less stressed I get about little things like now than I would have even a couple of years ago. Like, because I think last time we were on the podcast, I was just like endorsing how easy it is to travel and move overseas. I have been in the throes of some like absolute classic travel shenanigans over this last week. But gosh, it's humbling and just like such a good reminder that my life is just so much better when I just laugh things off than when I just get stressed about things. I think unfortunately, I would say this is my most toxic trait, and all of my family and friends would probably agree that I feel like at this point in my life, having to pay extra for overweight luggage, it actually has just become my identity. Like I try so hard and I just always seem to sabotage it. I know what happened on this last flight was that I had some like wet clothing, like it just didn't dry overnight, which would have added a couple of kilos, or like just like it felt like it was unthinkable to not buy this really cute little tea set, or I don't know, I forget, I like buy some like huge bottle of lotion or something. But this bag that I paid extra for, it's like, I don't know where it is. It's in Spain somewhere. I haven't got it yet.
Oh, it hasn't arrived yet.
No, this expensive bag has not arrived yet. So we're waiting on that. Luckily, we still have the podcast mic though. But you know, when you lose luggage and you just slowly start to realize all the things that are in it, you're like, oh, and I don't have shoes. Oh, and I don't have undies, and I don't have this, and I don't have this. So I've been wearing this dress on rotation for quite a few days. However, my mum always told me, always make sure you have like a spare pair of undies with you. And that has helped me out on more than one occasion.
Big t-shirt, leggings, and a pair of undies.
That's what you need.
Rolls up into a little ball and becomes your entire wardrobe for as long as you need it. Speaking of travel, we launched the August 2025 Beyond Body Retreat in Bali last week. If you haven't seen it, I'll be popping some imagery up here, but we will put the promo in at the end of this video. We are so excited. We have obviously been taking our amazing guests down to the south coast of New South Wales for our last few retreats and the one that we have coming up in November. But we are now deciding to go international. How are you feeling now that we've launched our next baby?
I couldn't be more excited. I'm thinking about my travel plans for next year. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll spend 3 months in Bali and then maybe we'll go to New Zealand. We'll do something else. I think just, we have gotten so much personally out of the retreat. So just being able to do it, because one of the reasons we're doing in Bali as well is because we can have more people there, so we can share the experience with more people. I just think it's going to be magical. I am so excited for it. I was so excited to tell clients about it as well.
Yeah, I think magical is the word. And I think when we've come out of each recovery retreat experience, we've been like, that was magical. And it is, like, the South Coast is absolutely beautiful and the house is beautiful and the town is beautiful. There is something, every time I go to Bali, and especially to Ubud, magical is the first word that comes to mind. And then when we found this extraordinary property, this very private paradise that we have now booked for August, it fit that billing of magical. And I think if you're going to create an experience like this for people and have them come and, explore this healing together in community, being able to do it in an environment like that, I think just makes it an unforgettable experience as well. It's all the great recovery stuff, but it's also expanding on all the things that we talk about that make recovery so much richer and really, I love this word, fortify all of your hard work and all of the lessons. And to be able to do it with people who just have like this unspoken language they share with you, who understand just how big of a deal that is.
Yeah, because it's a seriously big deal. And we'll celebrate how much of a big deal it is. So come and spend 5 days with us in Bali.
Yeah. So we've got all that information in the description box of wherever you're watching or listening to this. And as I said, we'll have the promo for anybody who's watching on video at the end of this episode. But the next step for anyone who'd like to come is to get in touch with us to book a chat with Holly and I, all about the retreat, all about what we have in store. So get in touch with us and we'll line that up in our diaries. So today we did, again, some crowdsourcing because we love sort of interacting with you guys, and you always give us the most amazing things to think about and talk about and expand on in all things recovery. So today we're going to be talking through some of your biggest recovery fears, which you sent across on Instagram. Again, we had so many. So again, this is probably not going to be the last time we do this, but we wanted to unpack them, to show how much we all have in common. I think when we're recovering, often we can do it where we're not really in contact with a lot of other people who've been through this experience. So I think this is a good way to see how not alone we are with some of our fears and thoughts and beliefs, etc. And also just to sort of maybe help to look through these things at through a little bit of a different lens and from a different perspective. So the first one that we have to unpack is that there is going to be this never-ending hunger, and as a result, developing binge eating disorder as we progress
Hmm.
recovery.
Hmm.
What did you hear when you sort of heard that one? And how would you kind of approach that fear?
I think I have probably heard this fear, if not on a weekly, like a fortnightly basis since I've been doing this job. And I think this is such a good one to explore because, look, yes, when you go through phases, maybe really long phases of restriction, you should be expecting a lot of hunger for sure. That is completely normal, but it's not going to be never ending. But you won't know that yet, and you likely won't believe it yet because you haven't spent long enough rebuilding a trusting relationship with your body. You don't trust it. It probably doesn't trust you either. Because building a trusting relationship with your body, it's like building a relationship with a person. Like it takes time and patience and these little minor experiences that are slowly going to rebuild that foundation of trust. Because I think what a trusting relationship with your body actually looks like is it communicates, you respond accurately. For example, like you have a headache, you drink more water. You're yawning, so you sleep. You're hungry, so you eat. Like this is how the body speaks. It's through pain and symptoms, but your eating disorder silences that language of the body and assumes that anything it's trying to communicate with you, this is a threat. It considers it a threat, i.e., hunger or extreme hunger. But let's just call it hunger because I think the word extreme just adds a little bit of like unnecessary drama. The eating disorder sees that as a threat, right? And then like cues this extreme fear. But when you actually learn to trust your body, it trusts you, meaning that it knows it's going to be fed consistently with what it needs, the intensity of that hunger and those cravings, they actually will neutralize. And when you learn to trust your body, you're going to have less of this fear of this never ending hunger because you actually realize I now have the evidence that it does indeed end. And I think when you practice this, not only does sort of like that physical and mental hunger settle, but so does a lot of that excess rumination and stress around it. This is just such a good fear to do a dialogue about and really ask the eating disorder, what evidence do you have that this hunger is never going to be ending? I think when fears feel like so big and intense and you're just kind of lost in the darkness that's just surrounding you, it's really hard to see past this little cloud. It's like that example you just did where clients say, this is the end of the world. I think this is what this fear can really feel like. You can't see past this immediate struggle, and you don't realize that in a few hours you could feel completely different from this moment. Because I think in this sense, the opposite of fear is trust.
Mm. Yeah, beautifully put. And for anybody who's watching the video version of this, we have another co-host these days, which is Lola, and she's getting behind me and bashing into my head. So she's a nice little layer of entertainment. But yes, I completely agree. And I think that, this is an understandable fear because the great irony of eating disorders, especially where there is restriction at play, and I just want to go on a little bit of a side tangent about restriction.
Please.
We think about restriction as by amount. Restriction is not just by amount of food. You could be
Mm.
eating quote unquote enough volume, but cutting out food groups or restricting food groups or restricting as far as delaying food, like waiting hours to eat breakfast or, really putting long pockets of time. Your body's going to experience restriction based on those metrics, not just overall how much food you're eating, right? Because we put it into these patterns where it knows that another long period of not eating is coming, and then it gets access to food, and what's it going to do? It's going to make the most of it regardless of whether or not overall there's enough volume. Restriction also impacts more people than people who have diagnosable restrictive eating disorders. I have rarely met anyone who at some point in their eating disorder or disordered eating across their behavioral profile has not had restriction by those definitions be a part of their behavioral profile. It is not limited to body size, diagnosis, non-diagnosis. The amount of people I see who believe that because of maybe their body that they couldn't, it's not restriction. And then we look at the blueprint of their eating and it's like, there is absolutely restriction happening here. This is where the stigma just lets so many people down in so many different ways, but this is one of them where people aren't even aware that restriction is at play. But one of the fears that I hear from people is based on this irony of, eating disorder tells you you can't be trusted with food, so it takes food away from you. And then you have this totally understandable biological response, which is, I'm not getting enough fuel, so it's all I'm going to think about, and it's all I'm going to hyperfixate on. And your eating disorder uses that to go, see, you can't be trusted with food. And that's a reframe that I do with people all the time, which is when they're like, I just want to learn to trust my body again. And I'm like, you've got that the wrong way around. Your body has to learn to trust you again. Your body is the result of how many eons of evolution. It knows how to be a body. Unless there is something diagnosable here that we need to know medically, your body knows how to be a body and how to send up these signals. Your eating disorder's only been around for X number of years in terms of its presence in your life. Who probably has more knowledge here? And people have this sense of, like restriction is down one end of the spectrum behaviorally, and then binge eating behaviors are down the other end of the spectrum. And what I tell people is you're putting them on different ends of the spectrum when they belong down together. Like restriction and binge eating and behaviors, like eating disorder behaviors, all belong in the same group. And the other end is ongoing recovery and being recovered, right? That's the two ends. And if you go through phases where you are eating reactively because you have been restricting, that's why I try to give people different wording, like reactive eating, where your body is reacting to being restricted, is not binge eating. Binge eating, and I know this is a part of both of our behavioral profiles, binge eating does not feel like reactive eating. Binge eating is like dissociating. It is like being out of control mentally. It's got very little to do with the food or the amount of food, and very much to do with the state of being you're in when you're interacting with the food. Reactive eating is purely just reacting to restriction and eating a quantity of food, which is trying to make up for that deficit. It doesn't come with the emotional state and kind of the, I would call it like dissociation, being hijacked, might be, not being present in any way whatsoever. So I think that people have some real misconceptions about what binge eating even is and where it belongs on the spectrum of behaviors. Thank you for putting up with my soliloquy, but I just wanted to clear up a few of those misconceptions, which I think really feed this belief.
Exactly. And I think those points that you made are just so important. And I think just to add to this, that fear of developing binge eating disorder, it's, likely coming from this fear of weight gain or being uncomfortable in your body. And this is, of course, something we hear so like all the time. For people who suffer with food disorders, a fear of gaining weight can feel absolutely paralyzing. So it's not at all surprising that this is a common fear. Like you were saying, for example, someone who is really struggling with like restrictive disordered behaviors and then develops binge eating disorder, like it's different symptoms with the same core problem. It doesn't matter if it's under eating or if it's overeating. Both, in a sense, are an attempt to bring this sense of okayness to a moment. Like both are maladaptive ways to manage experiences or to feel in control or safe or suppress emotions, whatever it is. I think like in this sense, like the behaviors just get so much airtime when it's really not, like we know it's just not what so much of recovery has to actually be about. If this was to actually happen, right? Like say someone was struggling with so much restriction and they completely flung the other way, they're likely actually probably skipping some really important steps of the work. If you're going through recovery and say like you have a coach or a team, or even if you're doing like a self-directed path, if you're doing the real work, you're learning the skills you missed, how to soothe, how to be with yourself, how to challenge these thoughts, and you're repeatedly practicing these things and again, you're not going to develop a different eating disorder. You will heal from the current one you have because you're actually doing the work behind the behaviors, and that's what's going to keep you well. Flinging the other way is not someone staying well. Continuing to restrict absolutely keeps you stuck. And I think, of course, feeling the fear to have to consume more is so scary. God, yeah. But I would also argue that living in fear and staying unwell is scarier.
Yes. And, like an eating disorder is never going to be on board with changing behavior ever, right? Like,
Yeah.
of course, it's going to do everything in its power, and it's going to use fear and intimidation to do that. Or anger and
Yeah.
intimidation, really. And what's behind that is fear. And as you know, like we keep unpacking those layers, fear of body change is fear of loss of control, it's fear of not
Yeah.
belonging, it's fear of judgment, it's fear of
Yeah.
rejection. And that's the deeper work we're doing so that those fears maybe aren't as convincing, right? Or that
Yeah.
we overestimate what eating disorders do is they overestimate how catastrophic things are going to be, and they underestimate our capacity to deal with them and to be resilient and to cope. So we're doing both. And that's the beauty of the work we do is we're doing the stuff with people. We're providing the evidence for them that, like when an eating disorder says, well, I'll make you feel really anxious and really scared. Yeah, it's right about that because it's predicting its own behavior. I can also say, Holly, I'm going to pick up this cup in 2 seconds. Like, yes, of course I can predict the future. I'm doing it. Like, of course it can say, well, I am all powerful because I can predict that when you do this, you're going to be scared. Yeah, no, duh. It's recovery. That's how this works. But in terms of all the other things it predicts, that you won't be worthy, that you'll be miserable, that you're not going to be able to have access to all these things you want. It can't say that. It can't predict that because it's not going to be around anymore. That's the whole point. So
Mm.
yeah, this is kind of the problem that I have with all the promises of All In, which focuses so heavily just on food because you're getting
Yeah.
all the food stuff and there's no cognitive change happening. There's no opportunity for people to pay attention to what their eating disorder is claiming is going to happen versus what actually happens, how their eating disorder claims they'll be able to cope and help seek and manage versus what actually happens, right? So yeah,
Mm.
I think that that's an excellent point, is that if we're taking care of this holistically, we're moving everything forward at the same time, and that includes all this fear and
Yeah.
all of this uncertainty. We're not just helping you pay attention to the evidence about the food, it's the evidence about who you are as a person and how people
Mm.
respond to you and how, your life actually starts to change in a positive direction versus all of the terrifying things it says will happen. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I think that this binary of like I'm either restricting or binging is just such an oversimplified, very eating disorder way to think
Yes.
about
Yes.
recovery.
Yes, yes, it's very much a eating disorder. This is this fear, and it's because I think this fear particularly it holds people in this place. Like if there's one fear that I think is so congruent across the board that really halts can halt people's recovery until we break it down, it's this.
Yes, absolutely. The next one, I'm sure, is a shared fear. And it's one I've certainly come across in client work, which is my partner will no longer find me attractive. And this can either be
Mm.
someone talking about this with like a current partner or just feeling like if they're not
Mm.
with a partner currently, that they'll no longer be able to find a partner who's going to find them attractive. Thoughts on this?
Mm. This one hits so close to home. I think I've spoken about this before, but when I went into recovery and also when I was suffering prior to that, I was in a relationship. And I would also say that some of the lowest points of my eating disorder were during this relationship, not because they wanted me to look a certain way, but because I wanted to look a certain way, because I thought that was going to be the only way that I would be worthy of that love if I looked the same way as I did when, they met me, which look, it was going to be a really uphill battle as I fought against my natural body size. And if I honestly only knew if I knew then what I know now, I would just give myself the biggest hug because God, she thought this fear was weighing on me every single day of my life. And I genuinely believed, eating disorder believed, that, having thin legs and a flat stomach would be the foundation of a healthy relationship, when really it was the poison of the relationship. My insecurities, the fear that my partner would no longer find me attractive, that fear itself actually drove a wedge through the relationship, not the weight. The weight was never a problem. How I let the fear of the weight take my confidence away and dim my light, that was the problem. Not trusting who I was and why I was loved, that was the problem. When I had these insecurities, I was a lot younger, but I hadn't yet taken the time in life to get to know myself like I do now. Like I hadn't taken the time to be alone and to find out what I enjoy and what makes me happy outside of a relationship, which meant that I was clinging on so tight to this thing because I didn't yet know if I was going to be okay without it. And how I thought was the only way I could keep it was being, conventionally attractive. But the cost of that was absolutely losing myself and ultimately also the relationship. I think like this fear that my partner, present or future, is not going to find me attractive is so valid because, like we were saying in the last question, we're made to believe that attractiveness, often in the form of thinness,
Yeah.
correlates with like love and likability and feeling seen and accepted and loved is such a basic human need. So I think this fear stems from a very real place. It's not superficial, it's attempted survival in a lot of ways. But I learned the hard way, my worship, I would say, of this belief that thinness was this prereq for love, ironically actually limited so much of the love in my life, like of my own and also, from others. And I really needed a new narrative. And that was needed to be one where I learned to tolerate and respect and eventually accept my natural body size. And I needed to do that, not being so focused on someone else having to do that. I also just want to just also acknowledge here my body privilege. I'm not, in a particularly small body, but I do have, the privilege of fitting into standard clothing sizes, and that is a privilege. But this whole thing, it really meant how I sort of moved through this. A big part of it was knowing that, attractiveness and attraction is not merely physical. And so much of what makes someone attractive and what makes someone charismatic and magnetic, it's their energy. It's how they carry themselves, right? And like it's their kindness and their curiosity and their laugh and presence and warmth, etc. I also just think it's their trust in themselves that they actually don't need someone else to complete them to make them feel accepted in the world, like because they actually accept themselves first. And I think that is an exceptionally solid foundation ship for whether it's a present relationship or a future relationship. So like to loop back to this fear, I would say to this person, it's just so important to shift the focus to trusting yourself, trusting that working on yourself can actually support a relationship. And by doing this, you might actually feel so much more confident in the security of a relationship through its changing seasons. Because if a relationship is in it for the long haul, both parties are going to go through many changes, physical, emotional, psychological. And there is no way of knowing how your recovery is going to change a relationship. But we can be pretty sure that by committing to recovery and taking this path, that it's going to change you in a lot of really, really positive ways. But I think, just being able to be honest about these fears, maybe with someone like whether it's an intimate partner in your life, is really important. I think a vulnerability here is super important. If not, I think these fears, like, and this is what happened to me, they just had way too much time to ruminate and expand on their own.
Yeah, I like what you said about like that worship of that belief because when I was 15, I went through a period of just very natural weight loss, like just going through my teenage years, just, body changes. And for the first time, I was receiving attention from boys for the first time. As we know, I'm almost 6 foot tall. I've been like that since I was 11. I was not exactly when I was a foot taller than every other boy in school. I wasn't exactly in the best position to sort of feel like I was like my peers, like the other girls, right? I was much bigger and hit puberty well before boys did. And then when I was 15, turning 16, I went through this physical change and it was like almost overnight, almost immediate. And I internalized that as oh, for me to be worthy and for me to be attractive, this
Mm.
is like, I can't ever lose this. I can't ever let this go. And if that felt absolutely true. Now, the boys who I met when I was 15, turning 16, were actually 18. Did we tell them we were 15, turning 16? No. These boys are not in trouble. Just to be clear, nothing happened. It was a kiss on a beach by a bonfire on Mollymook Beach. It's all okay. Nobody called the police. Right. And I looked a lot older because obviously my height, etc. But in my young mind, my view was boys have never been interested in me all my own age. And then suddenly I met these slightly older boys and they were interested, but I made this distinction of like, it's because my body has changed that they're interested.
Mm.
And never questioned that ever until I went into recovery and we kind of started digging through it, because it wasn't just that it made me worthy and attractive in my mind. I had also been teased mercilessly for my body my whole life growing up, being bigger in terms of my stature, etc., and sometimes in terms of my weight as well. I was in a larger body as a kid and during periods of my teenage years as well. Viciously bullied, hideously bullied, like awful things said, and being left out and being yeah, just rejected. And as you've said many times, I love that's part of your embodiment workshop that you do at the retreat, is talking about like your body being safety and this desire for thinness being about so much more than what the stigma tells us, which is it's about vanity, it's about superficiality. It is about belonging, and belonging is about safety. We are pack animals. We need each other. And so anything that marks us as different, or we have a point of difference, or that invites rejection or scrutiny, is obviously from a caveman perspective, that caveman brain, we don't want to be different. We must belong. In order to survive, we must belong. So it felt very, very ingrained for me in a similar way. And it was just something I just was not willing to give up, obviously to the detriment of everything, right? Because it's just these incredible ironies with eating disorders, which is in order for me to belong, I have to do these things to myself and my body, which isolate me and
Mm.
less of myself, which means I'm not going to be attracting the people who are probably meant for me, who would validate me, who I am as a person. Um, and that was certainly my experience. And then the eating disorder obviously can feed into that, being like, well, it's because you're not doing enough. It's because you're not there yet. It's because you need to try harder and do more, right? And it just becomes like this vicious cycle and trap. And I will have this conversation with people many times, especially clients who are single, who say, Mia,
Yeah.
attraction is a real thing. And I'm like, of course it's a real thing. But as to your point, it's way more complicated than just what you look like. And attraction is only the first bit of tip of the iceberg, right? In terms of if
Yeah.
we talk about really important relationships and connections, I will say to clients often, if you went to a wedding and the two people were getting married and their vows to each other were, darling, when I saw your jean size, I just knew we were going to be together forever. And I knew when I saw that MyFitnessPal app on your phone that you were the kind of
Lost
person who
you.
would light up my days until my last day. You'd be like, can we object? When's the objection part of the vows? Because I'm terrified for both of them. This sounds awful. That's not, eating disorders will only let us go so far in our thinking, and it won't let us get past that attraction piece because that's what works for it. But attraction is so much deeper and long lasting if it is about more than the surface. And attraction is about way more than just the, conventionally attractive kind of brackets that we all think that we should shove ourselves into. Otherwise, no one would be partnering up. It would be just for like the Victoria's Secret supermodels and the pro athletes, and no one else would ever end up in a relationship, right? It's completely discounting the very real people who you see in your everyday life who have beautiful relationships and beautiful families.
Yeah.
Every incarnation, they want to build their lives around, whatever they want from their partnerships. It's totally discounting the very real, very normal people you engage
Mm.
with every day who don't fit into this narrow standard that you're applying to yourself. And if your answer is, well, it's okay for them, but it's not for me, you need to identify that gap. Why? Why is
Absolutely.
it accessible to them and not to you? And that's where you're going to get to all the belief systems which are keeping you trapped in this cycle.
And I think so, I thought I just had as well. I think, because this is such a normalized experience of like, oh, like someone is going to be more attractive to a partner if they're in this like conventionally accepted body or beautiful, whatever it is. I think people almost see that as like, oh, that's an easy route to getting that, as opposed to being like, oh, so say that was off the table. No one gets to change how they look to, what's the word, like to attract, not attract, like,
To trap someone. I'm kidding.
I don't know, to like, let's say like to attract a partner, it
Yeah.
means that, okay, well, you're just left. Who are you? How can you attract a partner without having to change how you look? And I think that prospect can actually be really scary for people as well. Because they're
Yeah.
like, oh, well, shoot, like this is just me now. I can't actually change that much of who I am. But that's the work, I think, of like not shying away from actually being like, who am I? And what do I like? And what's important? And what are my opinions? I think that it's those experiences and being really I guess finding a level of like confidence and like assurity and like this is who I am. That's a really attractive quality.
Yeah, because I'll say to clients, I love what you said about like the easy route where it's like, oh, if I was just like, if I, again, let's just take a really arbitrary, superficial kind of broadly accepted kind of standard of conventional beauty being like Victoria's Secret models, right?
Yeah.
I'll say to clients, I'm like, so if that's the shortcut to partnership and belonging and love and, a really wonderful relationship, what's the divorce rate like amongst Victoria's Secret models? Like, there's no shortcut. There's no shortcut to connecting to somebody deeply and both being
Yeah.
authentic and real and vulnerable with each other. There's no shortcut. And if you're trying to cheat code your way to that, you're losing sight of the whole point. But it is, this always hurts my heart when this comes up because
Yeah.
it's obvious it is that gap of if it's okay for other people but not
Mm.
for you, the gap is I don't feel okay just being myself. I don't feel okay not
Mm.
kind of distracting with what I look like so that someone doesn't see what's really sitting underneath, right?
Totally. Which really leads us into the next fear,
Go for it.
for sure. Which this next fear is that I won't have an excuse for struggling or being a flawed adult.
Mhm.
I reckon I know who potentially wrote this question in. Maybe. But
There
I
are
think
actually
this is
lots of these.
wow, how interesting. I think with this one, I mean, the first thing I would think to say is welcome to the party. Like we're all flawed and we're supposed to be, and you don't need an excuse for that. What you need is acceptance, self-acceptance, and probably a lot of it. I think this is a really useful exercise to ask yourself here. When did you learn that you're supposed to be perfect? And if you're not, you need an excuse for it, like having an eating disorder as the excuse, because I think this fear, it screams the need for a new narrative, and that can begin any day of your life. I think we all at times are not going to show up with grace. We all at times will be selfish and short-tempered and maybe mean, and we're all at times, going to be passive in a situation and maybe regret it later. But I think to be able to see your missteps as sort of the likely steps that you needed to take to then be able to make the next right step, they're all part of the learning. I had someone say to me recently when they were sort of telling me about the story of the last few years of their life, they said like it's wasted time. And I really challenged them on that because I don't think anything is ever wasted, which really speaks to some of the conversations we also have had over the last few weeks about relapse, that nothing, not a day or a moment in life is wasted if we can learn from it or if we can stay present with it. But I also acknowledge, staying present with our flaws is really difficult because you have to see yourself messy and ugly parts and all and own it. But I also think, change on some level, which is what I think everyone wants, or you probably wouldn't be listening to this podcast. I don't think people like our voices that much. It definitely, maybe they do. I don't know.
So soon,
Um,
my foghorn laugh.
I think like change does not come from beating yourself up about your flaws or not giving yourself space to actually be flawed. How we change is by owning those flaws and then choosing to change. And I think, sometimes we also have to choose to change many times in the same area of life. Just like, some lessons need a lot of practice. Like me and my like endless overpacking, like I've had 29 years. I'm very much still working on this.
I think that this fiat speaks so much to a very, very common role of the eating disorder, which is something I talked about recently in a video, which is your eating disorder being a spokesperson for parts of you that you aren't so comfortable communicating from. Like, if I can put all of my quote unquote flaws into my eating disorder, then people, and I communicate through the eating disorder, they won't see the ways that I feel like I'm really flawed. Or
Mm.
if people notice I'm struggling in this way, I don't have to learn how to communicate the ways that I'm really struggling.
Yes.
Like, if they see that there's all the food stuff and all the body stuff and all the, that's all symptomatic and that's all, an expression of your suffering, but it's not the root system of your suffering, which is
Yes.
the self-rejection and the not feeling good enough and the maybe past experiences you've had or trauma that feels scary to look at or unpack. It's the weeds on top. It's not what's underneath the surface. And
Mm.
even in the way, like, if you even think about the way that your eating disorder, like, I'm this week in a course I'm doing with a group of people, the Recovery Essentials, we're doing help seeking and boundaries. And a big portion of that is your eating disorder has become this way that you communicate that you need help, but it's also how you communicate your boundaries, which is,
Mm.
I'm going to disappear into my behaviors because I don't know how to say I need space. So you just fall off the
Exactly.
planet and disappear into, a cycle of behaviors which keeps you separate from people. And I think this is one as well. If, like, you feel like you're not making decisions that you actually want to make, you're not moving in a direction in life that you want to move in, uh, the label of the eating disorder means that it's explainable in a simple way, which
Mm.
it isn't, because it's so deeply complex and it makes life that much harder. But I think that it becomes this channel of, again, it's always the magic trick, right? Look over here, don't look over here. Don't look at all the things that I probably actually need to communicate to other people. And this can speak for me. But that's
Yes.
a huge part of the work, is putting the eating disorder out of a job, because you can communicate your feelings and your needs and
Yes.
your boundaries
Yes.
and
But-
your
Mm.
vulnerabilities, not flaws, but maybe your vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and I think when you start to accept that we all have these, vulnerabilities or flaws or whatever it might be, it makes it so much easier to see the path forward that maybe you couldn't see before if you didn't actually give yourself the space to even think about the things that were, like, less desirable. If you don't actually allow yourself to acknowledge them, you can't really see them for what they are. And maybe they actually aren't that bad after all, right? Like, maybe you're like, flaws are actually just a load of like eating disorder bullshit that it's using to try to keep you unwell. Like, say, I think some like flaws, right, that I hear from clients all the time, they're like, if I don't have the eating disorder, I will be like greedy or lazy or selfish.
Mhm.
And what if your understanding of what is like greedy or lazy, like maybe greedy is actually just you eating a normal amount of food, right? Or lazy to you is actually just allowing yourself to rest. It's like, is that your belief of what these concepts are, or is it the eating disorders? And I think until you sort of accept, all right, they're these parts of myself, you don't actually get to start understanding them for yourself separate from the eating disorder.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when a client's like, but Mia, like, you wouldn't believe, like, I just spent the whole day on the couch on Sunday, and I'm like, yeah, I did that. And they're like,
Productive.
oh.
Yeah.
They're like, and I was so lazy, and it was so, and I just can't, like, oh my God, I just wasted a day, and how ridiculous, and like, that was so selfish. And I'm like, I did that yesterday. And they're like, oh. I don't mean it. I'm like, it's fine. I used to think that about myself as well, because I've done the
Yeah.
perspective shift, and I looked at where I learned that. Like, I grew up in a house where you had to be productive all the time. Like, you couldn't be seen
Yeah.
like not doing anything. Like, you had to be constantly productive. You had to be constantly doing something. There was not even
Yeah.
like something, chores or whatever. And so like, I still struggle with this, where I can rest and I can give myself permission to rest, but sometimes there'll just be this little low hum of, you should be doing something, or like, you're wasting your time, or you could be doing XYZ. Da, 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 da. So they're things that we sometimes have to, continue to challenge when they've been deeply ingrained beliefs, but they don't have to feed an eating disorder, right? And that's
Yeah.
that part of being flawed. That's one of the things that makes, I think, me flawed, is that I do have a lot of that perfectionistic chatter a lot of the time, and sometimes it's really paralyzing. And you're talking about your pep talks while you're traveling. A lot of my pep talks are, Mia, next best choice, next best choice. And that
Yes.
means next best choice for me right now. It's not next most productive thing I can do. It's the next best choice for me is rest. The next best choice for me is not putting the washing on. It is sitting and reading. It is watching a, reality TV show just to keep my brain a little bit quieter in that moment where I might be feeling
Mm.
anxious or preoccupied.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next best choice, right? So, as you said at the start, the goal here is not to not be a flawed human being. It is to make peace with that and to maybe look at some of the
Mm.
labels we're attributing and where we learned them. I
Yeah.
totally know where I learned these labels from. And
Yeah.
I don't want to be that person who taught me those labels. So, this is part of that evolving piece. You come out of your eating disorder and then you get to be a continuously evolving human being.
And it's great. Continuing to be an evolving human being and knowing that there's always like, it's not like you recover and you're like, oh, now I'm perfect. Now I've reached that point. It's like, no, now you're just human and you can see it for all that it is. And I think when you can see it for all that it is, it's a lot easier to be like, okay, where do I want to evolve in this area? What do I not want to evolve? And that's your autonomous decision as well.
And then the final one that came through that was quite popular was I can never intentionally lose weight again, even in a, and very important for the listeners, not the watchers, big bunny ear quotes, healthy way. Unhealthy, which I didn't put in. The person who wrote this put it in, which I always find so interesting because people's healthy selves show up even in this stuff where they're like, they're going to be able to lose weight in a healthy way again. And then they've put the quotes around healthy. And I'm like, there's your healthy self. There's the part of
What
it that knows this is pretty disordered, in terms of like the fear.
when I like when clients say in sessions like healthy, I'm like, what did you just say? And they're like, oh, healthy, and like put it in the
Yeah,
quotes.
love
I
it.
think this is a hard one for people even to admit, I think, because it's kind of like when you put it out there, when you say it out loud, it makes it more real. And I think for a lot of people that, almost feels like it has this risk of losing that last little part of the eating disorder that maybe they're really holding on tightly to. But here's the thing, everyone. Here's the tea. When you've had an eating disorder, you always need to be aware of your mental history. That's it. And your susceptibility to intrusive thoughts and disordered behaviors. That's congruent for everyone. There's no budging space. There's literally no budging space. So, intentionally trying to lose weight or go on a diet to change how you look, and that's the sole intention to change how you look, it's not appropriate. To want to care for yourself, and maybe, examples of that could mean things like cutting coffee or eating a more diverse variety of grains and veg. Like, that's different, right? I think weight loss can't be the goal. Creating more supportive habits around food absolutely can be. Like, I think, that could be like, i.e., eating more mindfully or being like, I'm going to really try to, not eat in front of the TV or slow down and that is useful. And I think that is helpful. But, even examples like noticing what food makes your heart happy and what food actually gives your body sustained energy, that is also appropriate. I would say on this, like during and post recovery, like to be honest, like my body changes all the time. I feel like my body set point is in this like 5 kilo range within my monthly cycle. It changes all the time. In slower seasons, it changes. In winter, I probably just make more, heavier food choices. And in hotter seasons, I'm probably just more hydrated and make more fresh decisions. And both seasons serve me. And my decisions in both those seasons are really intuitive. And then my body is just responding accordingly. I think this conversation really speaks to the super controversial gray area of health, right? Again, inverted quotes, health decisions in and post recovery, because we are not about any restriction in any form and no diet culture, but we are about helping people understand what health can be in an expansive sense. And that is very much about how you feel, not how you look.
Yes. I think that's so important, like investigating what we actually mean by healthy, because it's
Mm.
funny, say to me, I've got health goals. And I'm like, do you have health goals? Do you have body goals? Because they're not the same thing. I think it's also okay to say, if you want to lose weight, you can. You can.
Yeah.
I mean, this is this whole thing about autonomy and agency. No one's saying to you, if you recover, you get handcuffed to this, absolute commitment and there's no one monitoring you. There's not like cameras in your house from like the recovered,
Mm.
police force who are going to come and arrest you. You can, you like that's on the table. I would hope that if you have people guiding you in the way that we guide people, you wouldn't want to. by the time
Mm.
you've gone through enough of this process, because you would have investigated where that desire comes from and where some of these very narrow definitions of health and body might be. And you might have investigated sort of the disordered desire to do that, and the bigger picture of where that leads you every single time, and that it's just a constant vicious cycle. But it's kind of like the question about, like, can I stop recovery? You can. I'd hope that if you
Mm.
were given the options, like all the options in front of you, that wouldn't still be appealing to you, and that you could find
Mm.
a way around it. But if somebody really wants to do that, they have full autonomy and agency. I think
Yeah.
when people say to me, like, are you telling me that you never want to lose weight and you never have that thought? I have bad body image days. I mean, I have, as I've just shared with you, recently
Mm.
been diagnosed with a second inflammatory illness that changes my body all the time. I
Yeah.
don't have the second thought of losing weight will fix this, because all the evidence shows me it doesn't and won't,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like, I kind of gone through recovery and done all the work without coming to some pretty solid conclusions about the
Mm.
false promise in weight loss for all the things I was looking for, in that avenue or down that avenue. Um, so I think that it's about absolutely exploring why, as you say, like, you want to hold on to that little bit. What is it about keeping that little bit of your eating disorder in your back
Mm.
pocket that feels necessary? Um, and again, like, sure, for the time being, keep it on the table. Don't leave it unexamined. Um, but hopefully, like I said, if you're able to unpack why you have that desire fully,
Mm.
it just won't. I don't know a lot of recovered people who diet. I don't know any, actually.
Yes. Yes.
Is we know it's a scam, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. Like, we know it's a scam. We know it's a vicious cycle. We know but I understand where the desire to keep any of your eating disorder in your back pocket comes from while you're in recovery. But there's a reason, yeah, why recovered people go, no, I wouldn't, it's not interesting to me anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like that's such a good point. I know no recovered people who are also like, yeah, I'm actually on this new diet. I'm actually just doing this new thing because we have all the information. I think all the information is there and then you can make that decision. So it's like, yes, you absolutely can lose weight. This isn't a prison, but you also have to take the responsibility for that and be sensitive to your vulnerabilities in that sense. Like that this is just the cost of this experience.
And in this question as well, we acknowledge that body privilege, etc. But
Yes.
again, like, there are people who are recovered or in strong recoveries all across the body spectrum, and this isn't
Yeah.
inaccessible to them either. I see it and hear it from colleagues and friends all the time who are all across that spectrum of diagnoses and body diversity, etc., where it they also see it's a scam.
Totally. Totally. Because like, I mean, if diets worked, like everyone would have gone on one forever and the industry would be bankrupt. So they don't work.
Exactly. That's not limited to body sizes, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think but it's, again, I think whether or not it's this, or it's I want to hold on to a rule, or I want to hold on to this thing, I think it's that
Yeah.
onto a little bit of my eating disorder, which you don't have to get rid of that overnight. That's the point of this being incremental, and with time, that desire will likely go away as well, because
Exactly.
that will seem
Exactly.
more of a threat than it does a comfort.
Yeah. And I would say in someone's recovery as well, if this was a really real fear, let's readdress it in 6 months' time when you're further down the process to see if it has the same sort of pull and intensity.
Yes, beautiful. Fabulous. Thank you, everybody, for sending those over. We will absolutely revisit this, because I find this really, really interesting, as far as all the different fears people have, the ones they have in common, the ones that, might feel very specific to you. It might be nice to know that you are absolutely not alone, even in the ways where you feel like this could only be me. I know I felt like that a lot in my eating disorder, where I was like, no one else could have this thought. This is too wild, right? So to see that
Yeah.
with other people, I think, is really, really powerful.
Absolutely. I think being able to just shed a bit of light on these fears and air them out a little bit It helps you, I think, be able to stand with them, not be so buried by them, because I think that's what changes you and that's what changes how you relate to so many aspects of yourself and the life that you're creating is learning how do we actually manage these things, not how do we just avoid them.
Yeah, beautifully put. Where will you be next time we record?
I actually have no idea. I might be in Paris.
Ooh.
We'll
That's
see. We'll see.
We are also, we had a little bit of a chat on the podcast about maybe doing London next March. I think that's turned into we are doing London next March. So watch this space as well. We've got my assistant looking at spaces to maybe get a few of us together. So if you're watching from that part of the world, let us know if you'd like maybe workshops, maybe a meetup.
Live
What are
podcast.
we feeling? What are we loving? What are we doing? Somewhere cozy, somewhere cute, somewhere, as you said, like little like bookshop space or something like that would be lovely. In
Mm.
fact, if anyone has suggestions for
Yeah, location suggestions.
no. And if you have like, I don't know, a spare apartment that we can stay in at severely reduced prices, that would be great as well. But that might be a bit of a push. Well, I am so excited to be able to check in with you wherever you are next. Keep those Instagram posts are coming. And we will see you all very soon.